Hey there, just sort of introduce my face. I've been putting up videos without really showing my face because that's not really important. Really, it's the wildlife and all the experiences I catch. But here I am. This is me, Blaine, and trying to come out here and just get a little photo walk in, maybe a little macro wildlife. So I brought a couple of my long lenses, my macro lenses, that kind of thing. But here I am. Just want to do that real quick, no script. Hope you guys are having a good day. All right, what's some advice I give somebody who is doing outdoor photography, whether it's macro or wildlife? First of all, just kind of understand where you typically go, right? If you have a big old property, you have access to a big piece of land or property, okay, that's a different thing. You probably can get, a 600 f4 or whatever in full frame, one of those big ones. But if you're out in the city, or an area sort of in between suburb, that kind of thing, you might want to pack light, right? So there's plenty of those on every format, right? I used to have on Micro Four Thirds the Olympus 75 to 300. Kind of a slow aperture, but man, it was sharp. I really miss it because it's light. So I recommend, lightness, maybe a camera with stabilization. On those long telly ends, it's really hard to kind of get a stable image like on the very end. And for macro, I would sort of say the same, right? Because you get dealing with a really shallow depth of field. And what else? Really, you're trying to get those animals right in there, right in focus. And it's going to be really good to have some sort of a image stabilization, whether in the lens or whether in the camera. I tend to use a 60 millimeter macro MFT. Again, I use almost all MFT, right? I haven't gone full frame, but these days, just about any format with these modern cameras, you can find some good stuff stabilization wise. So that'd be my basic recommendation. One thing I want to emphasize is kind of knowing the basics of photography, in particular the exposure triangle. So those are the first three things you sort of want to know, especially if you plan on going on manual, right? When you're coming from like a phone to a camera, I know that's hard, right? If that's all you know. So I want to talk about that real quick. All right. First of all, I want to talk about aperture. All right. So it tends to control your depth of field, how much light you can gather, right? So a faster one, for example, 1.8 versus a slower one, 6.7, 7.1. Those things control, the amount of light you gather, and also the depth of field, which is to say, okay, if you have 1.8 aperture lens and you turn it all the way to its fastest, you're more likely to throw out the focus in the background. You can create a shallower background. And that's also going to depend a little bit on the type of sensor you're dealing with. Smaller sensors tend to have a deeper depth of field, and that's not a bad thing, right? I can tell you right now for macro, actually, it is a great thing. But every major sensor format has fast lenses where you can throw out the depth of field. And there's other tricks too, right? Like seeing how far you're away from the background, those kinds of things. So a fast aperture plus understanding where your background is, being able to throw that out is a real bonus to really understand and know. So yeah, on just about any major sensor, MFT, full frame, it's probably easy on full frame. Not gonna lie. And APS-C, right? There's a way to throw out the background. All right, you can get that shallow depth of field. It's just you're going to be dealing with something that's a little bit different depending on what sensor you have, right? With a smaller sensor, you're dealing with a narrower field of view, which it means For example, if you're using a 45 on MFT, it's going to feel like a longer angle view. It's going to feel like a full frame 90 when you use it. However, it's still a 1.8, right? So if you know what kind of distance you can work with, you can throw out that background easier. Your subject might be a little closer, but it's all good. And in fact, that's why I kind of prefer this particular sensor, because I can use those small, fast primes and still work at a pretty decent distance for certain wildlife, such as salamanders, snakes, lizards, that kind of thing. There's also ISO, right? You hear about that quite a bit. So it's something called dynamic range. I won't get into it in this video, but basically what ISO is your ability to also, it really has a lot to do with gathering light and also recovering shadows and highlights. So if you turn it up, it's going to be a little harder to do that, and you might introduce a bit of noise, right? And each sensor, has a certain level of ISO sensitivity where, it becomes noticeable. Now, these days, there are AI technologies and that kind of thing where you can denoise a little bit better in any sensor, but that is a real thing. And so if you have faster aperture lenses, that tends to be helpful in being able to keep a lower ISO. And I think you do want to do that to keep the image quality up, to be able to recover your best quality in terms of the shadows and highlights. And then there's shutter speed. Okay, so if you're a person who likes to shoot fast-moving subjects, okay, you're going to want to turn up that shutter speed. Okay, birds in flight, deer running, lizard running. Okay, you're going to want to turn up those shutter speeds. Now, again, what you can do there, right? If you have a faster lens, you won't have to turn up that ISO as much to get that nice shutter speed and freeze motion. However, if you have a slower lens, right, it doesn't matter what format you're using. You're going to have a little bit of a challenge in your hands, and you're going to have to turn up that ISO. Now, you're going to have to turn up the ISO regardless. I don't care how fast your lens is, but you have to turn up a little bit more if you have a little bit of a slower aperture lens. And having a slow aperture lens isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes they are lighter weight. You can get longer length on them, and they kind of tend to cover a lot of ground, right? Especially if you have a zoom. And that kind of leads me into something else, right? What's a prime lens versus a zoom lens? Okay, a zoom lens tends to have different focal lengths. You can have one that has constant aperture, right? I have the 40 to 150 Pro 2.8. I can keep it at that constant aperture. Now, if I added a teleconverter, which it takes teleconverters, it might not be as fast as that, but I'll still have that constant aperture to look at. Some zooms have a variable aperture, right? Like the 75-300 I cited earlier. But again, that's not always a bad thing. And if you know what you're doing, if you have for example, if you have a long enough lens, in the field, and you have a nice little background to work with, you can throw out focus easily. That's no problem. Now, the thing is going to be, if you want to turn up the shutter speed, you're going to have to turn up that ISO. And what if you want to do things like waterfalls or watch the clouds move a little bit? Well, you're going to have to turn down that speed, make it slower, right, to get those nice effects that you might see in those waterfall photos, those cloud photos, sky photos. And for most cameras, that's going to require you getting an ND filter so you can make slower stops, right, keep things a little darker. I know some of the later OM system, Olympus type cameras starting at the EM1 Mark III, I believe, and currently the OM1 series, they have something called a live ND, computational feature where you can simulate an ND filter, right? So that might be worth looking into. But Yeah, I would recommend if you're looking into those waterfall effects, that kind of thing, grab you an ND filter for most cameras. I would even say so, get a cheap one or something, even if you have like an OM system camera, right? Just to have as a backup if you want more stops. So those are a few basics in terms of like just getting out there. Right. And a little post and they have them for Panasonic cameras, but as you can see, that's not always a problem. I still really enjoy this camera too. The video quality is great for this camera being so cheap and old, right? So this is a G9 I'm filming on, right? And I love to use it because the video quality is excellent. The autofocus is a bit different. It's DFD, and it had a bad reputation. But this thing's pretty sticky, and like I said, the video quality outweighs all of that. So yeah, those are a couple basics I'd talk about, and your aperture dial, your shutter speed dial, and your ISO button might be set in different ways depending on what brand you have. And another thing I'll talk about while we're here is sometimes some lenses come with aperture rings, and some function on more than one brand of camera, others don't, right? I have my Panasonic 200, and it functions on my G9, right? And it gets pretty convenient sometimes, especially with video. But with my EM1 Mark II, which I prefer to use for stills, the aperture ring, doesn't do anything. But it's all good, when I'm doing stills. In fact, I kind of feel like it handles a little bit better. Anyway, those are a couple quick, basic things about photography, just getting in there, right? I started out, I didn't have much, to go by. And, a couple years later, I'm feeling more confident. I wanted to share a little bit of information that I have to help you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to see what I can see. Adios, y que tengan un buen día. Y'all have a good one. Another thing, okay, it doesn't take, a $20,000 piece of equipment. It doesn't even take, $3,000 piece of equipment to take good photographs outdoors, man. Especially in the macro world, right? I got my lens used for like $300. And the old lens I had, the 75-300, I got that for about $280 used, and had a blast with it. I hate I sold it, but these days I am carrying that 200, 218, just noticeably bigger, but with this format, it's still small enough for me to feel comfortable doing a photo walk every day. But then I'm about 6'3", 6'4". I'm kind of a big guy, but just start out with something with decent optics, which isn't hard to find at an affordable price, and get started there, right? Again, remember what I said about being able to throw out the focus with a longer lens, right? You can do that. You can do that without it being the fastest in the world, right? And another thing is, again, there's cameras out there with insane stabilization. Go for one of those, and you can get them pretty affordably. Look at the used market. That's what I do. But yeah, don't let anybody discourage you from going outside, taking photographs, just because you don't have the latest and greatest and most expensive. I found people who can kill it with phones with $200 pieces of equipment. So yeah, I want to give you a word of encouragement out there. If you're just starting out, just do your thing, find something in there and keep it. Don't do like me and sell it. Keep what you've got. Because sometimes you feel like going back to that old stuff and you'll miss it and regret it when you've sold it off, right? Unless you absolutely need to. And that's some bonus advice. Bye.